everyone, it's Wendy. Welcome. Today we're going to make this really pretty card using a fun watercolor technique and this really awesome stamp set, Amazing Birthday. So this is what the stamp set looks like. You can get it from Stampin' Up! In my online store, and it has a lot of really great images for making birthday cards. I'm going to be using my Misty tool, and I'm stamping on Strathmore watercolor paper. It's cold press and it's 140 pounds. And I'm gonna use the Misty to stamp it because I'm gonna stamp in Versamark ink, but because there's texture on this watercolor paper, it tends not to get all the ink on it. I'm not really sure how to explain that, except that it just doesn't touch all the surface of the paper because there's little pits in the paper. And so that causes the stamp not to or the ink not to get into all of them because it's a kind of a sticky ink. It's not a dye-based ink that would soak into the paper. And so there's little spots that it misses. So I'm stamping it a couple times just to try to get as much Versamark ink on there as possible. And I ran my embossing buddy over it, as you saw earlier, first to try to prevent any embossing powder sticking to the paper. So I'll just go ahead and remove this from my Misty, and then I can grab my white embossing powder, and I will just put the embossing powder over the Versamark ink. Versamark ink is sticky, and so it's created specifically for this type of project where you're wanting something to stick to your paper. And then I'm going to heat set it using my heat tool. All right, so you can't see the sentiment on here very well because it's in white on white paper, but you'll see it soon. So I'm using blue painter's tape and a piece of cardboard to adhere the watercolor piece down, because when you add water to watercolor paper, it tends to warp and bow and shift and do lots of funny things. So this kind of helps keep it flat while you're working on your project and while it's drying, and then you don't end up with curled up paper. I have some Stampin' Write markers that I'm using. I'm using Elegant Eggplant, Tempting Turquoise, Wild Wasabi, Rose Red, and Crushed Curry. And I'm just taking my Stampin' Write marker and I'm coloring right over the top of where I've embossed. Now I want to make sure that when I'm coloring, I'm getting down into all these little grooves, and I'm zooming in here just so you can see a little bit better my coloring. I'm pulling that marker out along the sides because when I wet the surface of this, I want there to be plenty of ink to run. So I'm going ahead and coloring my Tempting Turquoise, and then this is the Crushed Curry, followed by the Wild Wasabi, and last I'll add the Rose Red. And so I'm just inking up, coloring all over these areas. I'm not being super careful because I do want this ink to run and kind of go all over the place, and that's what makes a really interesting card and makes each card unique. So as I color here, I'm not worrying about how far out I'm getting or anything like that. I'm going to bring in my spritzing tool, which is just a Stampin' Spritzer. You can get 2 of these for, I think, $3 in my online store. And I'm just spraying water onto the surface of this. And as you can see, that ink begins to run because it reacts with water. So it begins to run and move. And as I want more ink, more places, all I have to do is add a little more water or add a little more ink, and it will do that. Right here, I'm just kind of letting it sit for a minute while I decided what else I wanted to do. And then I decided I wanted to color in a little bit more the pink and the purple. So I added more Rose Red and I added more Elegant Eggplant, and then I spritzed again. And then that created the kind of like a length on top and below the sentiment. This card really kind of like took shape as I did it. I really wasn't absolutely sure how I was going to put this card together until I was finished with this piece. So I worked on this piece first and I let it dry. And then I came back in with my Wild Wasabi marker and I colored over the word amazing because when you add water to the ink, it does lift the ink color. So I did that, and then I just took a paper towel and buffed off the excess where the ink was. And I did the exact same thing with the word make, because I noticed that the ink inside those words had kind of faded while this dried, and I wanted those words to show up. Okay, the trimming is a hot mess. I'm not going to lie to you. The dimensions, what it ended up being is 2¼ by 5.5. But the way I went about getting that was crazy. So I kind of cut out part of that video because I didn't know. I just was trimming away and didn't really know what I was doing, as far as I knew what I wanted the end result to be. But I just kind of had to keep trimming until I got what I wanted. All right, so then this card really starts to take shape, and I fell in love with it. I cut a piece of 5.5-inch designer series paper from the Neutrals paper pack, and I'm using the black and white diagonal stripes there on the edge. I just cut 1-inch piece by 5.5, and then I cut a super thin piece of silver glimmer paper, and it's 5.5 inches long, and I cut it, I think it's about 1/8 of an inch. And I went ahead and used my tweezers here with my Tombow and fine tip glue mixture to add this strip to the edge of the card, or edge of the design that I'm doing. And I have to say that these are the moments where I just fall in love again with the fine tip glue pen, because this is such an intricate thing to do. And I know it would be a mess if I was trying to use my Tombow mono adhesive. So this was wonderful that I had the fine tip glue pen for this. So I adhered that down, and then all I needed to do was add some dimensional tape to the back of this piece. Now, because this is a watercolor piece and it's kind of big, I chose to use dimensional tape. You can get it at your local hardware store. You can find it online on Amazon. You can get it at Staples. It's just Scotch, inexpensive dimensional tape. And I covered this piece because it is a watercolor piece and those tend to warp a little bit. And I didn't want that to happen. So I really covered that guy, pulled the release paper off, and then it was ready to go down on my card base. My card base is cut at 4¼ by 11 inches and then folded in half to make an A2 size card. And I just lined it up here at the top and placed it kind of to the side. Now I should mention that I am designing this card as a part of the Global Design Project Challenge. This is for GDP 024. And so I really was excited to see Michelle Last's. She had a fun card that we're supposed to case. I will say that my card is only similar in orientation, and it's not similar in design really at all. But she had a really cute little butterfly that was off to the side, kind of her card, like how this is. And so I tried to make my sentiment kind of line up with where her butterfly was. And I really love how this card turned out. Casing a designer is the hardest challenge for me because I tend to not know exactly what to do. When I don't want to case somebody and copy them exactly, right? It's just more for inspiration. So this is how the card turned out, and I think it's just lovely. It's beautiful, and it really pops on that black background. The one thing about having a black card is you have to do an insert, because if you don't, you have nowhere to write. So I went ahead and added a piece of Whisper White cardstock, and that's cut at 4 inches by 5.25. And that finished off my card. I hope you go on over to my blog and check out all the materials I used. You can get the links there. Subscribe to my video if you enjoyed it. You can click on either of these images to be taken to those videos and watch them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.